after you get the basics down, then start looking at the conformation. Again, I'm going to stress this, that it's a very sensitive subject. And sometimes it's best to keep it in here and not vocalize it. But use the information that you see to help you define what's going on. And are you always going to define it? No. And are you going to make mistakes? Yes. But the horse is going to let you know. And if we take time to watch the horse's action, they'll tell you a lot of things. Also the change in the conformation of the hoof, change in the hairline, change in the posture. That horse, because of the acute propreception in that limb, just like the end of your finger that you've cut off a few times, using your new Baldor grinder or something, that'll let you know what's going on for weeks and months after that. A horse can feel what you're doing when that foot is in the air, as far as your trim. Watch how that hoof goes down and places on the ground. Every time. If it's out here, if it's in a more normal position, look how that horse places its foot. And watch what they do after they place it. In respect to the horse's body, then we assert that we must examine the feet, Xenophon, before Christ. Very important, knowing what the feet are, how good the feet are. And sometimes we lack that in some of our genetics or breeding. But look at those hooves and how strong they are. We can manipulate those hooves. Horses which have good feet may be known by the sound, for a hollow hoof rings against the ground like a cymbal. And think about that sound. At one point I was working with a standardbred farrier, and I was there in the morning and all excited to see the horses, and he said, let's go down to the track and let's watch the horses. So we go down to the track, and he turns around and leans against the rail, and I'm like, what the heck are you doing? He says, I'm going to listen to them, because he could hear things that he couldn't see. Listen to the horses as they're walking down the breezeway or come out of the trailer. It'll tell you a lot about what's going on. Maybe not precisely, but it will give you an indication that something is going on. Every modification to the shoe has incidence on the biomechanics of the coffin joint. Everything that you do has an incidence. Every millimeter that you change has incidence. And that's important, because we can overdo it very quickly. We get carried away. Everything, every tissue of that foot is connected. Whenever you affect one tissue, you're going to affect another, and a lot of others. All of these changes to these coffin bones are the result of stresses to those bones over time. So we're not going to change the horse. We're not going to change how it's put together. We can affect the stresses and allow the horse to do the best of its ability. And accept that some deviations are beyond our so-called influence. Right? There are some that we're not going to change. And if we do try to change them, we're going to create greater damage. As in this picture, this horse had a little interference issue. Right? But there's other aspects involved. Okay, you look at the hoof and hasn't seen a farrier in 4 weeks. That's for sure. And then when the hoof is in the limb is in the natural range of motion, it's beyond the other one. There's really no way I could put enough baggage without crippling the horse on that horse to help it out with its interference issue. And to even try, I feel, is contraindicated, not a good idea. Pathology, disease, and injuries will influence hoof shape. All of those things will make a difference, not only hoof shape, but the musculature and everything else, the way the horse is going. Look at the hairline, look at the hoof structure, look at the rings. Take all that information into consideration and try to put it together. Gravity falls in straight lines. Think of Newton's laws. This is a windswept foal. And windswept foals grow up to be windswept adults. No matter what we do with them, there's going to be some residual effects. And this is important when you're thinking about what you're going to do with the hind hooves, right? Because you have one hoof going this way and one hoof coming underneath it. And you'll know by the conformation of that hoof and the changes to the hairline as to which direction it's going. But we get into attitudes or mindsets that this is a base narrow horse, so we have to put increase width of web on the outside or laterally. Well, one foot needs that. One foot needs it on the other side because of the way this horse is put together. Every hoof, every limb, the conformation is different. The pathologies or injuries are different. But you know that. You're working with two different arms. They're not the same. Your propreception in those two different hands are very different. What you feel on this hand is different than you feel on that hand. It may be the short circuits we have in our head as Farriers, but it's different. Your proprioception is going to be different to the limb. So think about every individual limb as you're working on it, and go from there. Use the hairline of the hoof to help define stresses. Watch what it's doing. And look at the hair. If it's popped out or flipped up, that's going to tell you about vertical stresses that have displaced the area of the coronary corium. If there's a high point, like in the toe corner quarter of this foot, that's an area where that foot has been displaced because of the stresses applied upon it. And there's different stresses, vertical, horizontal, diagonal. That's in a toe quarter, so I'm going to verify the issue by looking at that lateral heel, because there's probably an issue there too, because this horse has a strong rotational deviation, a strong twist somewhere in the limb, so it's creating a twist. That medial heel on the other horse, it's all jammed up, pushed proximally. It's got some vertical stresses on there. We can create a lot of these stresses. There's no doubt about that. We can change the stresses to that hoof significantly. There's a lot of other factors that can do it too. You change the stress, you can change the hoof. You can modify the hoof on the solar surface. But look at the hairline for some verification of what's going on. The shoe, the horse with the aluminum shoe on, look at that sole. See how it's all pocked up? That's a fungal infection on the sole. And that's a fungus that erodes the sole, right? You see that, you might better put your knife back in the box because you really don't have much of a sole. That's going to destroy the integrity of the foot. Look at the frog. You really don't want to take a knife to that because it's already compromised due to fungus. On the other foot, that shoe has been set down on one heel, and that's a horse that's working on hard ground, not a deformable surface. So if I want to take the stress off of that heel, I set it down or reduce the thickness of the web so that when it's standing square, there's no vertical stress to that corner, or I have reduced it. A flare, it's torn laminate. You're not going to get a flare without tearing or stretching the laminate. There's also compressed wall, vertical stress. Start with the trim. Start with the trim and have your trims on a regular basis, right? Every 4 weeks. That's optimal. It's not for everybody, but it's optimal. You can make an awful lot of change to the horses by taking care of them on a regular basis. Moving the base of support changes the stress by changing the posture. Every millimeter. And the faster the horses are going, or the lighter the horses, the less your modification is going to be. The heavier, the thicker the horses, the heavier the modification is going to be. So you think about this draft horse, there is a carpal valgus. It goes out from the carpus. There was an elongation of soft tissue on the medial, or the inside collateral ligament, and it tore. And so when that first happened, that was a soft tissue issue. Soft tissue issue. So the current thinking is for a soft tissue issue, you will increase the width of web underneath that soft tissue lesion. Well, that's okay during the healing process, but that changes by the day, by the week. And your shoe has to change with those changes. And over time, because it had torn some of the periosteum of the bone, it created a skeletal lesion, right? There was bone involvement. So it's now a carpitis. And our treatment method would be reducing the width of web underneath that lesion. So you have to change your shoe or modify your shoes more closely with the veterinarians to adjust your shoes according to how the pathologies are changing your healing. And our bodies change with time, as do the horses. The other one, it has can see the scar tissue on the fetlock, but it has a fetlock. We'll call it a varus, and we wanted to change the platform or the bottom of the foot, so just adding a few millimeters on that hoof will make a significant difference. On a horse that's moving fast, evaluate the hoof and the shoe wear. It'll tell you so much. There's such a story in that hoof. It tells you a lot about what's going on in the conformational deviations that are above, but don't just go by that information. Look and verify that by a few different perspectives to see if it's accurate. And if nothing makes sense, which sometimes happens, it doesn't make sense because you can't verify it, because you're seeing other things with other perspectives. There may be another influence, like a pathology or an injury or something like that. Look for those changes. And what am I going to do, in my opinion, on this hoof, where the heel is, one heel is further forward? I'm going to pick that hoof up and I'm just going to take the rasp and brush it back to the same distance. And I'll put a line right down through the middle of my rasp, like down the teeth, so I can pull that straight edge up on the frog, so I can see if my heels are even. It really works out well for me in dictating how far, if they're a uniform distance back. I get them a uniform distance back and I'll set it down, leave it alone, go to another foot and work at it. And I'll go around the horse and I'll come back and look at it again. It's amazing how things change. That whole hoof capsule is soft tissue, connected to soft tissue in a lot of the hoof. That whole hoof capsule can rotate, it can twist, it can go in every direction. It modifies according to the stresses applied upon it. You give that hoof a few minutes to relax and change. You come back to it, it's completely different. Brush your next biggest fire, wherever you might see the other heel is high now or something like that. Brush your next biggest fire. Go around the horse again. You get in that routine. It's amazing what happens. We're not locking those hooves into a position that's not healthy for them or normal for them. Better yet, trim your horse, put it in a stall, and shoe it the next day. See what happens to those hooves. They're not the same as when you left them. They're completely different. That hoof will moderate depending on conformation and stresses applied upon it. The shape and composition of the foot is an index to the health and general soundness of the whole horse from the Veterinary Encyclopedia. But look at that hoof and how healthy is that? If things are going well, your frog should be solid, right? The bulbs of the heels should be uniform. Your digital cushion and everything else should be strong and worked evenly. You have moderation in that hoof. You got pretty thick hoof walls. There's less fungal infections. All kinds of things benefit. But as we mature, as our horses mature, they're more affected by outside stimuluses. The twists, the rotational deviations. A twist, toed in, toed out. Those twists can be anywhere in that limb. Where they are is very important for you. And this is nothing new. It doesn't mean that you can't run your horse. A lot of horses with great deviations get along just fine. Multiple rotational deviations can be present in a single limb. And our primary rotational deviations will deviate the hoof capsule diagonally. That means that any modifications to your shoes or whatever you're doing to the bottom of the foot will also be on a diagonal to help those horses out with a major rotational deviation. You may be doing something to the lateral heel in the medial toe quarter in order to help those horses out with rotational deviations. Are we going to change them? No. What we're trying to do is moderate the stresses applied to that foot and limb. Practice the art of observation. As humans, we're not really good at observing, but we can practice that and we can get better at it. And if you watch the horse people that have been at it for a long time, they can see things in a nanosecond, and it's because they've been doing it for years and years. As you can. You know something's wrong with that horse as soon as it walked out of the stall, but you may not know exactly what it is. And we may never know, but look closely. Look closely and observe and practice observing. Practice looking at every limb. Practice looking at every horse. And look at it closely. Look for those deviations. And you'll start seeing replications and the type of issues they have depending on their conformational deviations. But no two limbs are the same. No two limbs are going to react the same because there's so many other influences like the environment, the management, the rider, and all those other things that are combined. When you're looking at a horse with a white sock or something like that, your eyeballs are going to go to that white sock. So take that into consideration because that's going to affect your observation. Compound rotational deviations within a hinge joint will increase the twisting of the limb. So I'm going to allow that horse to twist more easily. For one, take some stress off. So this right hind, it is flaring slightly to the outside, but the outside heel, lateral heel, is caved in. It's premature. It's further up. If you see that, you know that you have a diagonal deviation in the hoof and a rotational deviation in the limb. So that one I may set down the outside heel. This horse is prone to side bone on that foot, so I'm going to start with putting a side bone shoe on it. I'm going to increase the width of web in that quarter, but I'm going to set it down to the outside, so when that foot comes down, it comes down more gradually. I'm not going to hang it out the back door, which may have immediate results, but it's not going to give you positive long-term results. That foot is flaring to the outside, so it tells me that there's a low valgus that's stronger than the upper varus. It goes out down at the bottom. This is the one that saddles on your lap really easily and easy to hold on to. So widening the web on the whole branch is contraindicated. And I may also put a toe tab in it or increase the width of web in the toe because that's where the horse is spinning. The other foot, that's coming way underneath the body because there's more varus. It goes in more than it goes out. That one is going to benefit with additional width of web on the whole lateral side and maybe even reducing the width of web on the medial side or inside. That foot is traveling very close to the midline. That's the one that's going to interfere with the front foot or constantly take off your front shoe. So by changing the dimensions of the shoe and do it conservatively and do it on a regular basis, conservatively, a few millimeters will make such a difference in how that horse goes and how that horse sets its posture. And continually look at the horse, watch the horse, see what's happening. So that foot that's twisting, I'm going to reduce the traction on the limb. And on these horses that are going in Eurofelt, I might go with a half-round shoe, like a classic roller. For the great big warm bloods, I'm going to go with a big wide aluminum shoe. These are inch by half aluminum shoes. So we need that integrity for the big hoof. And this will allow them to slide slightly. We're in that very sticky situation. On the ones that are having problems, you go to a whirly shoe or something like that. It's 1.5 inches by half. It gives you greater mechanics with the bigger horse for the ones that are having more serious issues. Balance is different for every limb and in every circumstance. Dr. Parks did a great dissertation on balance in Dyson and Ross's textbook, where he states that balance is different for every hoof, every limb. If you look down through those two limbs on the same horse, look down through there, and if we just look at angular deviations, which are bends from the front or the hind, on the slide that's on your right, look at the deviation in the fetlock there, how strong it goes in, and then you see a twist. It's much stronger than it is on the other limb. Right? So if we shoe those horses, that horse's feet exactly the same, we're doing one a disservice, aren't we? We need to look at them closely. There's going to be a slight difference in the modifications we do to those shoes, and the modifications don't need to be great, and you don't need to have fantastic forging skills to do it. There's lots of ways to get it done. For rotational deviations, these horses aren't going to break over at the point of the frog. They're going to break over one side or another. So for me to evaluate these horses, I'm going to lift the limb in the natural range of motion, and break over is parallel to the ground, if you can get it right off of the ground. Just use that as an evaluation, and now I've gone to using a little level to help me out. Look at the wear in the old shoe to verify that, or look at the wear in the hoof to help you verify that. And this foot is compromised due to thrush. It hasn't been healthy for a long time, So taking care of that and working on getting this horse balanced for what it has, all will be important. Modify the shoe or use a type of shoe that decreases resistance during the rollover of the hoof. And you can see here that I've put some marks on there. We can change our traction devices also to be in line with the direction of travel, which is the direction of breakover. So if you think about that, if you ease the resistance, you're going to ease the stresses to the hoof. Modify your shoe to the extent and the location of breakover. Define where they should be at breakover. Not all horses need an increase in breakover, right? You look and define that, and I'll set a straight edge down the front of the pastern to give me an idea. And I want to do that while the animal is fully weight bearing. There's some more on that. And then you define how you're going to do that, whether you put a rocker toe or roll toe in, or whether you just brush it off, depending on how far back you have to move it, if it does need moving back. But adjust the traction devices to the direction of movement in the limbs. And with my Amish friends that I work with, I say just move your drill tech or boreal to the direction of travel. If you're working on warm blood horses or horses that are jumping and you're putting those stud holes in, put those stud holes in the direction of travel. They're going to be offset depending on the rotational deviation. It's really impressive how that reduces the amount of stress to the hoof wall in the lower limb. Tough concept, isn't it? Set the traction device in line with motion. This is a quarter motion shoe with a snowball pad in it. The whole thing is arranged so that it's in line with motion. We have standards for our certifications, for our competitions, and they're a basic standard for a straight horse. And it's important to learn those standards. But the horses don't all follow those standards. They have deviations and changes in their body because of pathology. And we have to take care of every limb as an individual. And we get locked into these standards or breed discipline standards that aren't correct for every animal that we work on. So define the rollover, placement of traction, and width of web of shoe. How do we define the width of web of shoe? But traditionally, the width of web of shoe is twice the thickness of the hoof wall. So most of our horses have a 3/8 inch hoof wall, but if you do thoroughbreds, you're hoping for a 1/2 inch, right? So it changes depending on where you are and the type of horse. But if most of our horses have a 3/8 inch thick hoof wall, then we use 3/4 inch stock. That puts the nail line in line with the white line, halfway through. And so a horse with a thicker wall, maybe you're doing Rocky Mountain horses or something that have a real thick wall, the basic standard for that horse would be twice the thickness of the hoof wall, or you'd use inch stock for a horse that has a 1/2 inch hoof wall. And vice versa, if you go narrow. And if we do anything different than that, it should be for a specific reason. Maybe you go for a wider width of web to protect more of the solar surface. Maybe you go for a narrower width of web because that'll allow them more traction. And the thickness of the shoes defined by how heavy the horse is or how heavy the horse-rider combination is, how sturdy the horse is, how fast the horse is. All of those things should be taken into consideration for that. With the rotational deviation, the hoof, the cracks in the sole, look at the cracks in the sole, how they're not even from one side to another at the end of the bars. That's telling you about a rotational deviation within the limb, but also your hoof rotates. That whole hoof capsule can rotate, and I've marked it and radiographed it and taken them apart, and they can rotate. I found them up to 18 degrees. That whole hoof capsule, it stretches. You may have one with axial rotation, that's a toe in. Your medial heel stacks up, that pushes that, that's a vertical force. Your foot will rotate around that vertical force, so your outside, your lateral heel will pull forward, and it will go to the distance it can, and then just where that crack is that goes through the sole, you'll notice that's where your quarter crack goes up. So by de-rotating them, or trimming them, as I suggested before, you can help them out. But also, that whole hoof capsule, that whole coffin joint can rotate on that coffin joint. There's an amount that can rotate, and it can create disturbance within the tissues there and a lot of stress on your collateral ligaments. So this shoe is for rotational deviation, and so my changes to that shoe are on a diagonal. If you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always gotten. Which isn't that bad sometimes, right? It's been working out, so I'm going to keep doing it. That's okay, but open your eyes to, there's a few other things going on there. If you take a few minutes, if you are allowing your customers to define you by how fast you do it, how long they stay on, and how cheap you are, you've done that. You have to train your clients that, no, there's a little more to this, and I have a lot of education. I went to the Farrier's convention and I learned more, so therefore you're going to pay more. See how that works for you. The management of conformation is forever changing. The basic concepts of what we might do to a foal are going to continue throughout their life, but maybe to a lesser extent. But the idea of those straight lines, getting the foot underneath the horse, and you may not be able to have the foot under the horse the same as it's standing dynamically or statically, or as it's dynamic or moving. It's going to be very different. Right? Just because they stand a certain way doesn't mean they're going to go that way. A flexural deviation over at the Fetlock, broken back hoof Pastern angle. So here, this is a therapeutic shoe. Put that on under for a short term. This is a man-made condition. It was a man-made condition in this horse, young halter horse, getting 40 to 50 pounds of feed a day, high protein. Things are going to go wrong, or right. But when they go wrong, they go really wrong. So this shoe was in combination with a veterinarian's work, changing the diet, changing the stresses, giving them a little exercise, changing the nutrition. It depends on a lot of people to help these horses out. Observe the rings in the hoof and the angle of the hairline along with diagnostic information for evaluation. Have a lot of information. Get as much information as you can get to verify everything you see. This horse's hoof, you can see from the hairline, things aren't quite right. The rings are verifying that. Get a radiograph of it. You don't need to take them apart to look at it. Get a radiograph of it and look at that to see if you get the same information to help you move forward. The bar shoes are used to affect stress through the positive effect, though the positive effect has a shelf life. Any shoe. Everything you do, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. So just because the bar shoe worked 2 years ago when you had a soft tissue lesion in the back part of this foot of the limb, doesn't mean it's going to be the shoe forever. It has a negative effect. Every tissue will change according to the stresses applied upon it. So with a bar shoe, you're going to affect some tissues. They're going to have more stress, and some are going to have less stress. But everything's going to be affected. So for that horse that we looked at, by reducing the width of web of the shoe, it allows the hoof to sink into a deformable surface. That horse has an exostosis of the palmar process, or the plantar process, the back part of the coffin bone elongated. So that's a skeletal lesion. I want to take stress off of that, so I can either taper those heels, or I can, on this concave, I just took off the outside of the rim to help that sink in a little more on a deformable surface. Because we don't want to crush the soft tissues between that elongation of bone and whatever we put down underneath. It doesn't mean this shoe is forever. It doesn't mean it's going to work forever. But for the meantime, it will help out, and then we're going to change depending on how the pathology changes or what the horse is telling us. You may also go with a passive palmar support like this flip-flop pad, or reducing the width of web. And anytime you have a change to the shoe, you can increase the mechanics in the shoe by going with a thicker shoe. Right, so if your 5/16 inch shoe hasn't done so much, then increase the thickness of your shoe. But for soft tissue lesions, you want to be sure and not increase the weight so much. Keep them light. Aluminum is a good way to go. Remember that a lot of our manufactured aluminum shoes are made of T67, which is a very hard alloy of aluminum. So the vibrations of that material are actually greater than that of steel. Not like the old days. I make a lot of my aluminum shoes so that it's a softer, pure aluminum. It's softer, it reduces more vibration, so it's okay for an arthritic lesion. Just something to keep in mind. But you can dampen that effect with a pouring pad or the addition of a pad in between the shoe and the hoof. Look at the bruising. White hoofs don't have bruising, right? So that's why they're better. No, they're worse. The black hoofs don't have the bruising. That's why they're better. You can't see any of the effects of the stresses that are applied upon them. But look at that hairline on the side. Look for deviations in that hairline. It'll also tell you a lot about stress points. Broken back hoof pastern access. Aluminum allows for greater thickness without the weight, and we can get more done with that. If you're lifting that foot up, especially if you have a weak foot, you want to be watching the horse. They will have some sensitivity because there's soft tissues that are not that strong. So we may want to support that a little bit during the healing process. Look at the bump on the hairline right above the front of on the front of the hoof wall. That bump of the hairline kind of disappears when the angle changes because of the change in the hoof pastern axis. Is this forever? No. It's going to change as time goes on, and we need to keep up with those changes. Using thicker shoes will give a greater mechanical advantage without an increase in weight. And sometimes we get stuck on certain products because this shoe worked for us sometime in the past on one individual horse. If instead we think about the mechanics, what kind of mechanics do we need to help this horse out? How are we going to change that? And not what shoe we're going to put on, but what combination of products. What are my skill levels? What am I capable of doing? Do I have a TIG welder in there that I can weld a heart bar into that shoe? Maybe not. So how else could I do it? I could use the addition of a pad with the wedge that I want along with the shoe to get the same mechanical advantage. It's a base narrow horse, meaning the limbs are going close to each other. It's broken back hoof pastern axis. And so a bar or wedge is often used for this horse for the treatment of soft tissue injury, which this horse is susceptible to in the lower limb, back part of the lower limb. So that bar shoe is going to keep the heels from sinking into a deformable surface to help that horse out during the treatment of that soft tissue lesion. I also put in a little extra width of web on the outside to move the posture slightly laterally. Doesn't take much, just slightly move that apart. It will change how that horse moves. I've also used a nail that is used prominent in northern Italy, Switzerland, southern Germany, which has a little bigger head, because this horse is going in Eurofelt, but occasionally goes in soft ground, so the nails will give some traction without too much. So everything I've done is for a reason. Am I always going to get it right? No. But the horse is going to let me know. I'm going to watch how the hoof is changing. I'm going to watch how the horse is changing. Listen to the rider. An elite rider can tell you a lot about what's going on and where it's going on. You might have been fired by a lot of 13-year-old girls because they saw something else new on the internet. But an elite rider can tell you a lot about what's going on without looking on the internet. Flexural deviations. So this one's sickle-hocked. And this one I have rockered or rolled the toe, trimmed it, and extended the heel slightly, and that's going to move the posture slightly back, depending on the amount of the distortion or deviation within the hock. Slight change can make an incredible difference. And don't just look at them when they're standing still. Put a couple of nails in it and watch this horse move to see if it's going in the right direction for a horse that's moving. No great thing is created suddenly. When I'm talking to you about what I do and what's worked for me, I'm not talking about how we're going to get that horse through the race on Saturday or get the horse through the jumping contest on Sunday. I'm talking about the lifespan of a horse. I'm talking about the long run. And it takes 9 to 12 months for that hoof to totally replace itself. Everything I do is going to be done conservatively and often, every 4 weeks. And if you're working on minis, which I know some of you do, as much as you love it, every 2 weeks might be a long time for a mini foal, right? Because they change so quickly. No great thing is created suddenly. Look at the deviations in the soil. Look at and watch what the modifications to the shoes and how they affect the shoes. This is a deformable surface in the riding arena, and by increasing the width of web on one side, it is not sinking so far into the soil, and that's measurable. I can measure every footprint, and you can see the difference on that. So the side that was being vertically stressed or pushed up, I've reduced the width of web, so when that horse lands and is bearing full weight, that will sink slightly further than the other side. So I'm reducing the vertical stress and reducing the compression on those lower joints. Also changing the posture, moving that limb slightly to the outside to help reduce those stresses. With angular deviations, angles as seen from the front or behind the limb, change the base of support, change the posture. It doesn't need to be a lot. So in a foal, we would glue on a shoe or something like that to try to affect the posture of that animal and change the stresses. And in the young foals, early on, before 3 months, we can have great effect on that limb. After that, we are still going to have effect. We know that by changing the shoe, we can change the density of the bone on one side or another just by affecting the stresses through it. We can change the stresses on the soft tissues. And as we talked about before, conformation is a combination of soft tissue and bone to give that horse conformation. So by changing the posture, we're changing the effects on the limb, all through the limb. You can use pads to affect stresses on the hoof if you want to move the ability of that foot to sink in or the posture of that horse. There's all kinds of ways. Here I've used a couple of Luex pads and cut them out, and then I'll add a little urethane in there to keep one side floating or one part sinking. On the other one, I've put a pad in there, and those holes are so I can squirt a little urethane underneath there to affect that. Well, I don't have to do a lot of forging. This is very effective on your horses to help them out just by changing that. But I like forging. This is a Tarsal valgus, base wide. I'm going to increase the width of web medially to the inside. You see how that mule's ears are back? Better pay attention when that happens. They have a memory like nobody else, and they're very quick. But the quickest ones are the zebras. They can hit you with all 4 feet right in the forehead at one time. I'm sure of it. When I woke up, I felt that. But so different conformations of horses or different breeds of horses, they're going to have different conformational deviations. And so for a long time working in New England, I thought, well, most of the horses that have hock issues, it's the right hind. And it was where I was working. Most of the hock issues were right hind. Most of the lamenesses were right hind. That's in the days where they only injected one joint. So more right hinds were injected. Most of your catastrophic injuries are on the left front, right, in racing thoroughbreds. But if you look at those horses coming around the track and analyze the conformation, I saw a lot of conformational deviations in the left fronts. But then I went to Croatia and was working there, and the horses are completely different. I didn't see those things. So it's going to depend on where you are, the breeding, and all kinds of other factors. Consider a strong shoe for a weak hoof. If you have a weak hoof, consider it. And that's going to depend on environment. Or pull the shoes off and leave them that way for a while. Dr. Michael Stewart often recommends the Oklahoma lameness treatment, which is turning them out in the back 40 with the cows, right? Leave them alone. Go look at them again next year. It's amazing what the body will do on its own to re-heal, given the right opportunities in time. And it takes time. When I went to Northern Europe and worked, I always thought, well, on these weak feet, I'll put a little light shoe on and say a prayer every time I send a 3.5 nail in there. And they say, no, you've got to put a big shoe on there. Put a big shoe on and gave that foot some integrity. It's amazing how the feet came around for me in that situation and there. So our results are different with everyone and everything. Use your spatial propreception to define lines. Spatial propreception, that's what you're great at, because you can shape a shoe to fit a foot, right? You have spatial propreception. You see measurements. You see differences in degree from 1/2 mile away that other people can't see because you've practiced that. Use your spatial propreception, and if it looks wrong, it probably is. This draft horse on your far right, it was very bull-legged, so a bull-legged horse, the varus deviations are greater than the valgus deviations. It goes in more than it goes out. The horse hadn't seen a farrier even from a distance in a long time, and it was flaring to the inside, so it was cutting its legs off when it was walking. And so just with a basic trim, it really helped that out. Then it wasn't cutting its legs off. You took that sharp edge off, but just by putting a shoe with a slight extra width of web on the outside, lateral side, they're able to change how those rings were in the foot, keep that horse from interfering anymore, and help that horse out for the long run. Think about those lines, and if it looks wrong, it probably is. Increase the width of web laterally for that bull-legged horse, and medially, and reduce the width of web medially. So it doesn't take much. This is just a quarter motion shoe, and just with your fancy new grinder, you can make a lot of additions or subtractions to that shoe and your knuckles at the same time. So there's lots of ways to accomplish these tasks. For that base narrow Fetlock varus horse, Pastern valgus, it means it goes out at the pastern and it flares to the outside, and this is the hoof that sits in your lap real easily when you pull it back there because it has that low valgus. I may increase the width of web because it's base narrow, I'm traveling very close, but that lateral side, I'm going to set it down to the outside like a side bone shoe to help that horse out. And that horse that had been crushing that outside heel, it's pretty interesting how they'll heal up and get stronger and better over time. It's a perimeter fit though, right? I'm not hanging it out the back door. I'm not hanging out the side. It's a perimeter fit. You'll notice a change at the hairline in 4 weeks when you come back. And then it'll have a little bulge there. And if you notice that hairline, it has that bulge, you're going in the right direction. For the base narrow, Fetlock varus, Pastern coffin joint valgus, I'll increase the width of web laterally, but I'll set it down to the inside. Set it down to the inside. So I've increased the width of web to the inside. Just something that works for me. You can set down the branches in any direction, and the direction in which you set it down can have a significant input or effect on that horse over time. Base narrow Fetlock varus, Pastern varus, that means it goes in and it goes in. This one has a rotational deviation too, because you have a medial toe flare and a lateral heel compromised. So the adjustments I'm looking for are going to be on a diagonal. And I might just run a crease in there to increase that width of web, knock down the outside. Lots of ways to get this done. It's a side bone shoe, right? A side bone shoe is an ossification of the collateral cartilage because of a lot of trauma. We say that it's always a lot of trauma, but there is some studies, one from Sweden, I remember, that they actually found the side bone in very young horses that had never seen a farrier, never worked, never been on a hard surface. And so when they eliminated the stallions that had that issue, and they ended up with a smaller horse. So some of it is because of our breeding practices and the size of the horses. For those of you who have been at this for a while, you know that our horses have changed dramatically in the last 40 years in height and size. When my grandfather was farming in the 50s and 60s, his big draft horses were about 16 hands. Now it's not uncommon to see 18 to 20 hand heavy horses, right? In our quarter horses, 14 hands, 14.2. It's interesting when you look back at history in the 1300s during the Crusades, the British bureaucracy said our horses aren't big enough to carry the men with armor. The average horse was 14.2 hands. So they said, we got to get some bigger horses in order to carry these. They only had 3 stallions that were over 15 hands, and that's what they wanted, a 15-hand horse. So I'm thinking those 3 stallions were pretty busy for a while because all those that weren't that height got castrated or eliminated. But horses have changed over a long period of time. Current trends. The modifications to the shoes are consistent with the severity of the deviation and subject to change. It's always going to change. I suggest that you take and you don't reset shoes, that you put new shoes on every time. Just like when I started out as a farrier, I was hoping the first client would pay me cash so I could buy gas to get to the second one. I'm working and my outside of my heels are wearing off all the time. Pretty soon I'm walking base narrow very close. I'm getting more compression on the inside of my joint spaces, more elongation of the soft tissues. I'm starting to hurt the knees, then in the hips, and then in the lower back because of my shoes. If you have a horse with a conformational deviation like this, it's going to wear into that shoe very quickly. And if we reset that horse, we have lost anything we might have gained. Also, if you're putting new shoes on, it's good for the manufacturers, I know, but it's also good for the horse. And if you take the time to put a new shoe on, maybe take the time to evaluate the horse again because it has changed. The horse has changed. Take the time to evaluate what's going on and make your changes according to what has happened. Treat often, every 4 weeks. Be conservative. I'm talking millimeters. Maybe not for your 18-hand draft horse, but for your saddle horses, and especially if they're going fast. If I'm making a change to a thoroughbred racehorse, it might be a millimeter. It's going to make such a difference, especially at speed. Would be extra conservative when modifying horseshoes for light bone, fast-moving horses. It takes 9 to 12 months for the hoof to grow out. 9 to 12 months. Look for changes in the hairline along the way, but you are going to make an incredible change, but it may not be fully visible for 9 to 12 months. For that reason, if you shod the horse 4 months ago, and you shod the horse 2 months ago, and you're shoeing the horse now, and you still haven't been paid, there is never going to be any benefit to that horse because, one, the duration of the shoeing period, and two, because we all do things differently. That's the art in it, right? We all have different ways. There's a lot of ways to get the same mechanics, and think about that when you're working on the horses, and use the mechanics that work for you. But just experiment. You could experiment lightly. The degree of modification to the shoe is consistent with the degree of the deviation. This is a percheron foal. So it's heavy, it's thick, it's heavy bones. So even with this foal, I've gone with 1 inch on the outside width of web to help this horse out with that deviation. Now after those joint spaces have closed up and things like that, that may be excessive. It's during the treatment phase and not beyond. Contralateral breakdown. Be consistently observant of this. Right? You have a horse that's lame in one hind, look at the other one and take care of that one more closely. This goat had some good bloodlines, so they wanted to use it for breeding. It broke its right hind limb, and the surgeons did a beautiful job putting that together, but during the healing process, the left limb broke down. I see that deviation in there. And and I worked very hard at getting this horse to be fully weight bearing and to get the same angle of shot with the camera before and after shoeing. So on the left, the limb was breaking down, the animal could hardly walk. On the right, this is a few minutes later, there's a small shoe on there, an ibex cuff that was about a ½ inch addition to it. And look at the difference in the posture of that limb, just over a few minutes. It works for us, it works for our goats, it works for our horses. This is the most important part of my lecture. You can be exposed to the finest thinking available, but if you do not it will not do you or anyone else any good unless you cook it on your own stove. And so if you just did some small modification, like, okay, I'm going to adjust my rollover pattern in my shoes to the point where that horse breaks over. I'm going to adjust my traction slightly. Or maybe I'm seeing those collapsed heels on the lateral branch of a horse with an adaxial rotation, so I'm going to set it down to the outside and perimeter fit it and just see what's happening. It's pretty exciting what can happen if you pay attention to and observe and do something for the conformational deviations that you've seen. Thank you.